Good evening and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5. Today is February 2nd, 2018, and the presidency of Donald J. Trump has gone on for a little over a year, and we have had a chance to assess the progress of this 45th President of the United States. He recently had his State of the Union address, and we saw his assessment and his advisor's assessment of where he has been and where he hopes to take his administration and the country in the years to come. Assuming, that is, he survives long enough to complete his first term. A lot of people really despise this president. Many people think he is the best president since Reagan, and maybe even the best president of all time, aside from maybe George Washington or something like that. So you have tremendous diversity of opinion, tremendous friction between the two opposing sides, a lot of policies that at first glance seem repugnant to some people. Some people are hoping that he will be able to follow through on his promises that he made in the campaign. And I think what we see personally in Donald J. Trump's performance so far is that by and large he has attempted to fulfill the desires of the constituency, the American people, those who voted for him and gave him a chance to fill that big chair in the Oval Office in the White House. And while I don't agree with everything that he does, I do agree with some of the things that he has done, and also I agree with some of the things that he has planned to do. What I find most remarkable is that he has seeded optimism in this country that we haven't seen in quite a long time. And this has resulted in a stunning and amazing and unprecedented rise in the stock market, which is good for a lot of people. And not only those people who have a stake, a direct stake on own stocks and companies that have gone up in value, but also an indirect effect that makes America a more conducive place to do business. And this is one of the main reasons why Trump got the presidency, because he was not a politician. He was, at least in many people's eyes, a successful businessman and a lot of savvy. He wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. And so this gives him a bit of an advantage over politicians with a very mixed track record. And we take the example of Hillary Clinton, for example. She has so much baggage. She is dragging through life the chains that would remind me of Jacob Marley, the ghost of Jacob Marley from The Christmas Carol, that is forced for all eternity to drag around heavy chains that he forged in life. That's a quote. I forged these chains in life. And so it's the same with Hillary Clinton, who was unable to break free from her past, her very, very checkered and scandalous past. We have to remember that Hillary Clinton was plagued by scandal right from the very beginning of her political career and even before, when she worked for the Rose law firm in Arkansas, which had a lot of very shady business going on. And there's, of course, Hillary Clinton's own personality and her decisions, her campaign decisions made it very difficult, if not impossible, for her to win. And this is with also a tremendous advantage that she had. She had a huge amount of money to spend, way more than Donald Trump was willing to spend, and she also had the goodwill and the commitment of the legacy, or what they call the dinosaur, or the mainstream media, behind her. And she believed that it was her turn to become president, that Bill had his chance, he got his 8 years, and now she felt that it was her turn and that she deserved it to be the president, to be the first woman president. I remember with consternation her acceptance of the candidacy, in which she wore a white outfit, and then I'm not sure if it was NBC or ABC or MSNBC, whoever did the filming of her acceptance of the candidacy for the Democratic Party for the presidency, they put a filter on the camera. And if you know anything about cameras, you can change the appearance by putting on different filters. And this filter accentuated the white outfit that she was wearing. It was pure white, and I'm sure it was planned, in which it actually glowed. Her outfit glowed in a very unnatural and spooky way to me. Now, the intent was to make her appear goddess-like. That's the only explanation, that you have this glowing aura around this woman who's happily, surrounded by, putting her arms in the air, like this, like this, and glowing. And this is, of course, a trick that has been employed forever by leaders. If you can associate yourself with divinity in some way, then this gives you a leg up. This gives you an advantage that your ordinary mortal opponents do not have. And it is just a form of trickery. And many people pointed this out. I'm certainly not the only one. I noticed it right off, that there was something very odd about the way that her white outfit was glowing. So this is a level of deception that once you're aware of it, it will turn you against her. And this is what she did over and over and over. Scott Adams, for instance, pointed out the use of the word dark. Scott Adams is the cartoonist who created the Office comic. It's a very dry humor. It's called Dilbert. Really very clever. And he's written several books, and he was following the candidacy and the campaign of Hillary and Donald Trump on his blog, and has a lot of blog followers. And he's a very popular figure because he correctly called the election for Trump way before anybody else did, like a year before, soon after Trump announced the candidacy. He said he saw that Trump was doing everything right, and the other candidates were just not even operating in the same ball game, in the same ballpark as Trump was. And this is, of course, and he explained why Trump has trained himself to be a successful negotiator and a deal maker, and a guy who knows how to get his brand out there to persuade you that his brand is the brand that you want to go with. And the Trump brand. We know about that Trump has been touting and relying on and selling his brand for decades. The Trump brand. It's the Trump this, the Trump that. The Trump golf course, the Trump hotel, the Trump casino. Those are most of his holdings, my understanding is. And so he's a guy that wants to be in the center of the spotlight and enjoys that and is very comfortable being there and expects to be there and has been there for so long. He was a reality TV star with The Apprentice and famously saying, "You're fired." And I wouldn't call him an actor, but he has the understanding that what you need to do is to keep the attention focused on yourself. And that was one of the main things that he did during the campaign. Now he's continuing to do that as president, continuing to keep the he keeps people talking about him. He's deliberately provocative. He makes certain that he doesn't keep his position concretized. He keeps it somewhat fluid. He changes it. He says one thing and his spokesman will say something else, and they will contradict each other. And this gets the pundits and his critics talking about it. And at one point they were saying that the White House is just a confused mess because of the mixed messages that are coming out of the White House. But the important operative takeaway from this is that the pundits were talking about the issue. Okay, they're saying we're getting two versions of this issue. Here he says this one thing, and here he seems to pull back on it. And then, so this is part of the deal-making expertise that he brings to the table as President of the United States. And what he said from the beginning is, I'm going to treat the United States as a business, and I'm going to sell America to the rest of the world as a brand, as a business, and that you want to come, he's going to convince people that you want to come to buy our products. You want to buy American, you want to think American, you want to emulate America, you want to be worried about the power of America, so in other words, he's building up the brand of America. And America is a brand. America is a dream. America is an idea that was created by the founders. They created a very powerful brand, a product. America, if you think of America as a product, that was what's created. And it was shiny and it was new. And it was actually described as the shining city on the hill, that's what America would be. That was the idea. So you take this high moral ground right from the start, and America is, we're new, we're better, we're innovative, we're expansive, we offer more than other countries have to offer. Freedom, the Constitution, the land of opportunity, that's a phrase associated with America. I don't think there's any other country in the world that has that phrase, the land of opportunity, just etched into its, into its forehead, so to speak. Land of opportunity. People want to come to the land of opportunity. Now, this has not changed. People still want to come to the land of opportunity. And the reality is that it appears that for many, many people who come here, it really is the land of opportunity. I have talked to people who are immigrants. Like, for instance, I had a long conversation a few years ago with an immigrant from Lebanon. He started a restaurant, a Lebanese restaurant. He had pictures of Lebanon on the walls, and the food was Middle Eastern food. And I said, why do you like, America so much? Because what I see, of course, as a native, is I see all the problems with America. I see the crimes that are committed by the U.S. government around the world, the corruption, all the failings, the poverty, etc. And he says, well, because, he says, the people in the Middle East are crazy, he says. They're nuts. He said, people around here, they're not crazy. And he said, it's just, the Middle East is, around Lebanon, those people, it was just too chaotic. So in other words, one of the things he seems to be saying is that America is a good place to do business, because business thrives in stability. And the Middle East is anything if unstable. You don't want to start up a business in a country that could be overthrown or overrun or have terrorist attacks. And so one of the reasons why, and there are many reasons why Trump wants to have a secure border, and he always uses the term the wall. But that's more for PR. That's because it's easy to imagine the wall. And one of the reasons is because it enhances the idea that the United States is a stable place, it's secure, and this is attractive for business. And Trump made this very, very clear when he went to Davos and he gave a speech about 20 minutes long to the world's richest and most powerful people. A big room full. And he said, America is open for business. And he said, last night I went to dinner, this is during the speech, with about 15 of the captains of industry from around the world. And I think I made about 15 new friends. In other words, and he went on to say, they're going to invest in America. In fact, they already are starting to. And in fact, we're seeing this. This is why the stock market has gone so much higher. There were many people on the left who predicted that as soon as Trump got into office, the stock market would collapse, the economy would collapse. Completely the opposite has happened. And Trump, very cleverly started up an award for fake news, and he gave the top award to Paul Krugman. And Paul Krugman is the very well-known and highly respected columnist for the New York Times who prides himself on being an economist. And he predicted, famously or infamously, that Trump, if he were elected, would tank the economy. And of course, the complete opposite has happened. And you saw the response of the Democratic congresswomen in Congress during the State of the Union speech. They rarely clapped. They didn't look happy. Many of them were frowning, as a matter of fact. They were on their phones, a lot of them. I don't know if they were playing video games or texting people. And they did not look like they were appreciating what Trump had done, even when he spoke about improvements in the State of the Union that benefited the country as a whole, the American people. And the American people see this, and this is not good. You talk about a bad visual. And visuals, of course, are the most powerful form of communication, more than the written word, more than the words of the speech. And you know, the people on the left that Trump sowed division with the State of the Union address. From my perspective, I did not see that. He said a lot of things that every president says when he gives a State of the Union address, and that is that we need to come together as a bipartisan unit to support America. And what somebody pointed out, and I thought that was fair that he said that, is when a president says that, and presidents typically say that, what they mean is we need to support my policies. Let's all get together and get behind me, I'm the president, and get these policies in place. Well, the visuals of whenever the C-SPAN camera panned over the audience and showed the Republicans standing up, you know, cheering, clapping, shouting in excitement and delight, as opposed to the very sourpuss, moping group of Democrats. The visuals are that, hey, maybe the Democrats are just sour grapes and they're unhappy, that they're still unhappy after 1 year that Trump got to be president, and they're not going to give him any credit for doing anything. You know, after a year, you can't say that this is all the result of Obama. And that's what some of the people on the left are saying. Oh, you know, he's just riding on Obama's coattails. I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think if Hillary Clinton had been standing up there, they wouldn't have said, oh, she's just riding on Obama's coattails. I think they would have been on their feet, cheering, stamping, clapping for everything that she said, just like the Republicans were doing. So what we're seeing is partisan politics. And of course, this is the way it goes. But the American people get very tired of this. They start wondering, well, when are these political parties, both the left and the right, going to start appreciating and working for what is best for us rather than what is best for them, for their particular brand, whether it be left or right, Democrat or Republican. And this annoys a lot of Americans because, after all, we're paying their salaries, you know. And whose government is it? Is it their government or is it our government? Is it the American people's government? And so we have to recognize that at some point there's going to be the law of diminishing returns is going to take effect for the Democrats. Now they're playing to their base, and they're playing to the idea that Trump is an illegitimate president, and we need to get him out of office as soon as possible. Therefore, we are not going to give him any credit for anything he does. And of course, this, in a sense, also is an insult and a slap in the face to the American people. And they say, well, he didn't win the popular vote. Well, that's not how American politics works. If he had been out for the popular vote, his campaign would have been completely different. And so would Hillary Clinton's. They both would have been concentrating on the most highly populated states and completely ignoring the low population states, like for instance out west, where there are very few people in some of those states. So, I mean, the whole game plan, the whole strategy would have been completely different. So it's very unfair to say that he didn't legitimately win the presidency because he didn't get the popular vote. If the shoe had been on the other foot, you can bet that they wouldn't have said that. They would have, just like the Republicans, are saying, well, what do you mean? He just followed the rules. That's what he did. That's how the game is played. And so we have to really look at what he's done and try to parse out what we like and what we don't like, what we think is good for the country and what we think is bad for the country. One thing, for instance, that I think was really not good about his speech was this idea of cracking down on drug dealers and giving them heavier sentences. Well, many, many drug dealers are just users who sell drugs to support their own habit. So you're going to increase the sentence. We've seen this all before in the war on drugs, and it doesn't work. Other people, as soon as the drug dealer is taken off the street, other drug dealers just step in to take up the slack. There is no ending to it. There is no ending to it. And it doesn't work. And really, America would be more suited, and I suppose this could never happen in America, but would be to follow the lead of Portugal, which had a really bad drug problem, apparently. And of course, they're a small country, but they decided at the very highest level that they were just going to legalize all these drugs. And it basically solved the problem. Drug use actually went down. And of course, it puts the illegal drug dealers basically out of business. What we have, in a sense, you could say, well, in a sense, we already had that. We tried that. We did it with the opioids. The opioids were legal. And, they still are. But what happened was you had some very dicey, sketchy, these basically criminal pharmaceutical companies pushing opioids, legal opioids, and getting people addicted. And my understanding is, from what I read, is that they even told the doctors that these opioids were not addictive. This artificial opium. And so my brother-in-law is a doctor. He said, they were really pushing these hard, these legal opioids, these legal drugs, these painkillers. And they have the pain clinics. And doctors were instructed to, use the 1 to 10 scale and ask people how high, how bad is your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And of course, for some people, it's easy to exaggerate. That could mean anything. What one person might consider to be a 3, another person could consider to be an 8. That's not a valid mechanism for deciding whether or not people should be medicated with legal opioids, artificial opioids, or whether you should tell them, oh, just take an aspirin, that'll be enough. So. And also particularly when the doctor believes that the opioid is non-addictive, and then they tell that to the patient. And then, this very sad thing is, of course, that many people were subscribed to opioids, and they do a wonderful job of not only masking the pain, which is mental. Pain is a function of the brain. The brain sends out the pain signal to show that something is wrong, to give your body warning. If you didn't have pain, you wouldn't know to pull your hand away from a hot stove when you touch it. The pain signal gets your hand away automatically from that hot stove. And so the pain serves as an important function of the body. So to mask the pain, let's say you have a bad back and you take painkillers. Well, that may not even be the best remedy for that pain. Maybe what you should do is go see an osteopath or a chiropractor, or get a massage. There's so many different things. Or institute a set of exercises that will help you to heal up your back and keep it from reoccurring, so you don't have reoccurring pain. Instead, what the doctors were doing, and this is a way for them to make money, of course, and the pharmaceutical companies to make money, and it's really not a good way to go, is to just mask the pain. That doesn't really fix your back. You know, if you have one of your vertebrae is out of place. And the idea of the painkiller, of course, is to, so you can function while your back is healing up. But if you get addicted in the process, and some humans are very susceptible to addiction. Unfortunately, we're hardwired. Our brains are, some people just have it in their DNA. You can inherit the susceptibility to addiction. So it's really not fair, that to blame people for getting addicted. Oh, you could say, well, why don't they just use their common sense or their willpower to not to do this. But what we really need is, education. But that's the last thing that the pharmaceutical companies and these other big corporations and this giant industry that has been created around managing pain. It's just amazing. So when we have Trump saying we need to crack down on drug dealers. Now, I think they've already cracked down on drug dealers. They've been cracking down on drug dealers at least since the 80s. But it echoes back to the Just Say No program and Dare to Stay Off Drugs and the various other programs, which are, okay, just say no. Although for some people, like teenagers, that's a challenge. Dare to stay off drugs, or just say no to drugs. It gets the teenagers thinking about drugs. Well, why should I do that? Maybe I should try it, because if the adults don't want me to take the drugs, maybe it's fun. I should try it. To be a rebel. I'm going to do it just to be different. Screw them. They're trying to run my life. I'm against it. I'm not going to do that. Just like some people. Actually, we have this crackdown on the Confederate flag. It literally is almost a crackdown. It hasn't been criminalized to own and display a Confederate flag, but it almost is. It's almost getting to that point where it's a hate crime. But one thing I've noticed is that I think I see more Confederate flags flying than I used to see, because the Confederate flag some people could say, well, it's a symbol of slavery. But I think for the people who for probably 90% or more, 95% or 99.9% of the people who display the Confederate flag, to them it means rebellion. And when you're young, you're nothing if not a rebel. This is a typical stance that a teenager or young adult takes against the establishment. So if the establishment doesn't like you to fly a Confederate flag and you want to be a rebel, what are you going to do? You're going to fly the rebel flag. That's what they call it, the rebel flag. That's the rebel flag. That's a symbol of rebellion in America. And so, in a way, all you're doing is getting people more, you're incentivizing them to fly the Confederate flag. And I'm a big fan of wanting to educate. I believe education is the key. But education is so easily manipulated. You can teach the history of the Civil War as a war purely against slavery in the South. But it really wasn't. That was part of it, but for most Americans, most Union soldiers who volunteered to fight or were drafted to fight in the Civil War for the North, most of them, it was not about ending slavery. It was about saving the Union. And you see this in the propaganda, the Northern propaganda. Almost all of it is about saving the Union. Save the Union, save the Union. So in other words, just the very act of breaking apart the Union was the motivation to go to war and prevent that from happening. Because the rebels were seen as traitors, and there was a dream of the United States of America that people held on to, of a sovereign nation that had a certain shape and a certain look and contained the southern states. And they were not, and President Lincoln, who really spearheaded all this and got the war started in the first place, was very much concerned and felt that it was his duty to save the Union. And the South said, no. The founders said right from the beginning that if we don't like the way things are going, we can dissolve the Union. And they decided we don't like the way things are going. We don't like the way that the North is bossing us around. You know, we are going to we're going to go our own way and start our own country. And of course, they ultimately failed in that, and history has moved on. And the Civil War was a test, in a sense, of the resiliency of the idea of America. What is America? What is America all about? It is that shining city on the hill with opportunity for everyone. And has it ever lived up to that? Not really. But that's the way, that's the goal. What we see now is people turning away from the idea of America as the shining city on a hill, because they believe that there is no chance for America to live up to the founders' dream, the great dream of the shining city on the hill. And they just want to destroy it completely. And why do I say that? I say that because this is the essential meaning of open borders. Open borders means no borders, no barriers, no walls, open borders. In other words, you don't have security. You are essentially creating a superstate that combines Mexico and Canada into one superstate. And that's the way it would have to be. It's like, for instance, what does open borders mean? Most people don't think about that much. Okay, let's say that you have a car chase headed toward the border, and you have let's say the FBI or chasing somebody down the road who's trying to escape them, and you have the open borders policy, and you have either the local police, or like I said, the FBI, or some other police force, and they cross over this open border. Now, the jurisdiction of the local police would normally stop at that border. But if there is no border, that means that that police officer or those police officers can cross over and continue to follow that criminal until they catch that criminal. That's just one example. Also, Americans, we would assume with open borders, would be allowed to cross over, buy a house, or just wander around Mexico and wander around Canada, and that would be an open borders policy. You would have free flow of people between Canada and the United States. Has Mexico or Canada given any indication that they would allow Americans to wander across the border into either Mexico or Canada and just, I don't know, just wander in and just say, hey, you know, go into Canada and let's say, I need an operation, I want, you know, free stuff. I need an operation and I can't afford it in the United States because we don't have universal health care. You do, so I just want it. And I just want to live here, but I don't have a job, I don't have any identification, and I just want to live here. And they would just say, oh, has Canada or Mexico given any indication that they would support, let's say, indigent Americans? And believe me, there are plenty. There are a lot of Americans without jobs who are homeless, who would probably love to move down to a beautiful resort town in Mexico and just hang out, you know, and just get, you know, public assistance. Mexico has, I guess, free health care. And so that would be the meaning. I mean, that's just scratching the surface of the actual meaning of open borders. Most people don't seem to think about that. They only think about, well, people should be allowed to come into America. But people don't understand that, hey, there's a lot really desirable about Canada. A lot of people would like to move into Canada from the United States, American citizens, and American citizens would like to move into Mexico. I mean, I think it would be great. I think it would be wonderful. Just go down to Mexico, get a little piece of land, and set up a nice little hacienda down there. And but no, you know, if you don't have the proper papers in Mexico, if you don't have permission, and if you don't have a lot of money, they're going to throw you in jail. And they're going to deport you. Just like well, actually that's not happening in the United States. In some areas there is. But we have between 10 and 20 million illegal aliens or undocumented migrants. So in other words, they have no documents. And there's no reason in an open borders policy why Americans who are completely undocumented shouldn't be able to go over and live on the dime of the Mexican people. If it were truly an open borders policy. And so let's assume that we do get open borders. Now that means that the governments of Mexico and the United States and Canada are going to have to merge. They're going to have to start becoming one government. So essentially what you have is a North American superstate. And where would that government be? Where would the capital of the North American superstate be? Would it even be in Washington, D.C.? Or would it be like in, for instance, Brussels in the European Union? It's very odd to me that you have the European Union, which is, the attempt has been made to make it into a giant superstate. But the capital is in Brussels. And you have the European Commission, which makes the laws and runs the superstate. You have a European Parliament, which is a rubber stamp, essentially. The European Parliament cannot make laws, it cannot propose laws, it cannot veto laws. They are made by the European Commission. There's several layers of power over the level of the European Commission. And none of these people are elected by the European people. Yes, they're elected on the level of the European Parliament, but they're almost powerless. They give the American people or the European people the reassurance, and it's a false reassurance, that they are a democratic institution, but they are not. Because once you reach this level, democracy goes out the window. And so where would the capital of the North American open borders superstate be? It's hard to say. You know, could be Mexico City, could be somewhere in Canada, could be in Alaska. I mean, Alaska would be part of it. Could be in Hawaii. Maybe they'd could be in the Florida Keys, could be in Puerto Rico, could be just about anywhere. It almost seems like Brussels was chosen because it's not in the middle of Europe, but in the edge of Europe, on the edge of Europe. So you have most of the most problematic countries, the people in the European Union, the weakest, poorest countries, pretty far away from Brussels. So they can't get out in the street and protest in front of Brussels. If you've ever seen this enormous, very forbidding fortress that's in the middle of Brussels, that is the home or the capital, it's a citadel, very forbidding looking, in Brussels, you will know what I mean. You will see that this is not meant to be welcoming and to be a democratic institution of the people, by the people, and for the people. Whereas in the United States, in Washington, we have these quaint antique buildings that are still being used. You know, they're very much 19th century architecture, like the White House. I mean, that's not a modern-looking building at all. Or the Capitol building, or the Supreme Court, and these various buildings that. Now, the Federal Reserve building, if you look at that, the Federal Reserve definitely has that unwelcoming look. There's a reason why. And this is what you see over and over. The NSA building in New York City, its headquarters, is the most frightening looking. It just looks scary. It is this giant concrete building with almost no windows, just a few windows, of poured concrete, just ugly, really ugly. The NSA building, incredibly ugly. We have, at least in this country, we have this connection, this historical connection with the founders and with the past, using the old buildings. Even though underground, we have almost an underground city in Washington, D.C., of levels, of offices. It's a network underneath the city that most people will never see. And you have to have that because, I mean, obviously, we live in a modern world and the complexity is amazing of what actually has to be accomplished. And they can't be accomplished in those little buildings, in those little old-fashioned buildings. So a lot of that is just for, it's for show, I guess. So we just squeaked by when Donald J. Trump was elected, a person who insists, and he's simply fulfilling the mandate or fulfilling the desires of the constituents, of the people who elected him, to secure the borders. And he chose to use the word wall. Now it's interesting that even the Democrats have talked about and understood the necessity to secure the borders. But I heard Nancy Pelosi say, we don't want a wall, we just want to secure the borders. So you see how the argument is really about just semantics and the visuals of it. The reason why Donald J. Trump used the term the wall is because that's the visual that he wanted to create. A big, beautiful wall. In his State of the Union address, he called it, "We're going to build a Great Wall." And what is the Great Wall? What came into my head immediately was the Great Wall of China. But he did that, and it fits in with, that was deliberate. That was written into the speech. He was reading from a teleprompter, I'm sure. And he wanted that image of a Great Wall. Now, whether the whole thing will be an actual wall is something else again. But it's a symbol, and it has to be there. We have no other choice at this point. And even the Democrats acknowledge that. But they don't want to use the term wall because that would be Trump. That would be agreeing with Trump. So they want to disagree with Trump and yet acknowledge that we need a secure border because they know that that's what the American people want. There's only a few ideologues who want open borders. And I'm not sure if they even understand what that means, open borders. Once you open up the borders, then you essentially have no country. You are saying we no longer exist as a country. The borders are gone. We're against walls, and this is more symbolic talk. Even though I've seen on many occasions people like Antifa and activists forming a human chain, which they call a wall, and preventing people that they oppose from entering certain areas. We're going to try to prevent people from going to see Trump. We're going to make a human wall here. Well, then when it comes to the wall on the border, they say, well, we're against walls. And even the Pope weighed in on this by saying, I don't believe in walls, I believe in bridges. Well, you take a look at the Vatican, and the Vatican has very high levels of security. It has a wall. So why doesn't the Pope tear down the Vatican wall? And also these celebrities, the celebrities who build walls, most of them live in walled compounds with their big mansion in the middle. And they have armed security guards. They want to take away the arms from the American people to prevent them from having security. And why? Well, you could say, And they would say things like, well, what do the American people need guns for? What do they have to protect? Yeah, they could say, well, politicians and wealthy people and celebrities have something to protect, but what does the ordinary American citizen have to protect? So why do they need guns? And I say, well, how about your family? You know, maybe you want to protect your family, your daughter, your son, your wife. Maybe you want to protect them. So it's a double standard. They have a double standard. They feel like it's all right. The celebrities say, you know, while they are surrounded by bodyguards and an entourage who are most definitely armed, then they are saying, well, Americans can't, you know, have guns. We've got to get rid of the Second Amendment. Well, that's one of the reasons why people come to this country and they like this country so much, is because of our freedom. And one of the reasons why Americans have freedom is because we have the Second Amendment. Without guns, that freedom can be taken away very easily. And that's very clear if you read the Second Amendment. That's one of the purposes of the Second Amendment. So there is a very, very strong reason, and that's one of the, and America is a very popular place. A lot of people still want to come here, and they can come, sure, if they go through the legal process, but we must be a country of laws. So that's all there is for today, and have a great weekend and sleep well.